Hi, I'm Paige Medlock, and this is the session on art in the refugee camp, images and experiences working through trauma. A note on format before we begin. This presentation is both pre-recorded and in person. I'll begin my PowerPoint of images with photos that have minimal captions on them to play as I speak. The slides are set up as my visual gallery in two parts and are timed to advance on their own. So they might not parallel specifically with my exact points in the talk. However, you'll recognize in picture what you hear me describe at certain points. The images are primary focus, and my narrative and explanation over the next 20 minutes support these. Part one includes my own photographs of my time doing relief work in Sri Lanka during the summer following the 2004 tsunami, rebuilding houses and often overwhelmed by the grief I witnessed, and also my shift to search for signs of life and beauty amidst destruction, using my camera to frame things. Part two then includes my photographs of children making art in refugee and IDP camps, and at a training conference for art therapists to demonstrate the potential we have to shift our vision from past experiences and present circumstances to seeing the future in a new perspective, so that steps can be taken in new directions and life can move in new trajectories. My hope here is that through these, we can navigate visual art avenues to work through trauma toward forms of healing. This topic could be unpacked much more fully. So as this is an overview, there will also be a file available that includes research resources and quotes by topics so that you can dig deeper into the voices that I found helpful here. And I'm going to start my screen share. And I'll start this slideshow in just a second. This topic is universal in that trauma affects societies and individuals across geography and generations, and yet also visual art is a space where transformation, change, healing, and seeing things differently can occur. When facing the visible reality of others, as well as our own traumatic experiences, we then may be moved to respond. This session explores ideas and resources to do so effectively through documented experiences and research. If we understand the potential visual art has to be regenerative or generative and even redemptive, then educators, as well as administrators, therapists, counselors, parents, curators, clergy, aid workers, etc., can create awareness, readiness, opportunities, and conversations for people to move from stuck, lost, displaced, to imagining, creating, participating in a new story. This session includes actual images, which you start to see here, and experiences of mine and others, rather than strictly distanced research, abstract concepts, or assumptions, and the artwork that they've created and the stories that they tell, which helps viewers learn, reflect, and find common ground, as well as be inspired and better equipped to work through life's most difficult moments and/or facilitate that movement for others. On the day after Christmas 2004, a massive earthquake near Indonesia rocked under the ocean, causing a tsunami to hit the coasts of the countries around the Indian Ocean. This event killed around 228,000 people, a third of which were children, and some statistics convey that the number of women was 4 times the more than men, waiting on them to return from fishing. The deaths occurred in 14 countries, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. The small island nation of Sri Lanka, just off the southern tip of India, was hit almost 100% around its entire perimeter. The country had the second highest deaths recorded at 35,322, with another 21,411 injured, and a massive 516,150 people displaced. A holiday train was struck from its tracks, not in this image, but you'll see in a minute, en route between the capital of Colombo and the town of Galle along the southwestern coast, and all the passengers were killed, including, according to locals, people running to board the train as it came through to escape the incoming wave. You'll see some of the images of this train and some that I took from under that train when a downpour drove a few of us underneath it to take momentary shelter. In the Northeast region, the tsunami reached over a mile inland, killing around 8,000 people in that area alone, which at the time was controlled by the Tamil Tiger Group, who were in a 20-year civil war with Sri Lankan government, wanting to create an independent state a few decades following Sri Lanka's independence. The Civil War was influenced by geography as well as culture and religion. You'll see images from this part in part two. From this area in part two. Militaries and non-government organizations, or NGOs, from various countries rushed to the aid of this devastated nation as quickly as possible. And according to locals, the first responders were the survivors, helping neighbors and families find bodies. Some of you may remember the events in the news or know people who were affected. I heard the news of the tsunami on my car radio over Christmas break, and later I watched the images on the evening news as I sat down to eat my turkey burger. My eyes filled with tears at the sights and the reports, and I put down my dinner to wipe my eyes so I could see. My dog ate my turkey burger as I was distracted by overwhelm, and I lost my appetite anyway. I asked, what could an art teacher in Kentucky do to help? My answer came shortly thereafter when I heard of two different opportunities to take part in relief work in Sri Lanka. One, a faith-based relief organization with which I was familiar, was establishing a new temporary group to partner with Habitat for Humanity to rebuild houses in the Gaul area. And the second opportunity was a friend of mine who had been transferred as country director for her NGO based in the capital city of Colombo, but working to meet needs in refugee villages across the country in the Northeast region. I left that summer to spend a month rebuilding houses and a month doing art with refugee children. I had participated in many short-term service and relief aid trips and had completed my first master's degree in cross-cultural studies while I was teaching art. However, when I arrived in Sri Lanka 5 months after the tsunami, I saw the evidence of so much loss and trauma on the landscape and the architecture and the people's faces. And I had an unexpectedly difficult time adjusting as a highly sensitive empathizer who processes information visually. A friend of mine and fellow art alum who co-led our group had just discovered she was pregnant, so she could not join the construction efforts. There she is on the right. And had perhaps noticed my need for a break. She asked me to join her for a day to take pictures. In that hot, humid, seemingly hopeless situation, my focus shifted. And through my camera lens, I began to look for, frame, and document proof of life. Years later, when I was doing grad work in Scotland, I would come across a book of Bob Geldof's photography in an Oxfam thrift store, and identified with one of his quotes in the book about hating to take a photo of such devastating subject and ultimately the reality that it captured. But my viewfinder now found hope too. When I returned home to Kentucky after that summer, I would eventually have opportunities to exhibit these photographs. That is, after I had a near meltdown at the Walmart photo developing kiosk. Have you ever had a moment like that? Where the cash registers are beeping and the bazillion choices are bombarding your priorities, and your heart and your mind are still just trying to catch up from what happened. After that first month, I left my team in the Gaul area to join another friend and fellow alum to work with an NGO who was working from their office in Colombo on the West Coast to focus on relief work up in the Northeast area. Their emphasis was meeting a variety of mostly physical needs to 7 refugee and IDP camps. These villages were both war refugees as well as those displaced from the tsunami, some doubly displaced. I worked as the psychosocial coordinator to address emotional concerns, and because the area's ceasefire had just been recently violated, my departure from the capital to the Northeast area was delayed for safety until travel bans were lifted. I spent about 2 weeks in the office on one side of the country, reviewing grants, doing research, and planning art therapy projects that I could lead with minimal resources and maximized hope. Once I could travel to the villages, I found a small shop that carried watercolors, oil pastels, construction paper, and oil-based clay. I ventured inland to see the mountain region and the tea plantations. If you've had Ceylon tea, it comes from this area. Then I headed down along the southern coast to participate, you see here, in a counselor training conference where I led and modeled an art therapy project with children for national and NGO counselors working with traumatized children. We made a collage of how life was in the past, how it is at the present, and how they want it to be in the future. Afterwards, at the suggestion of the counselors, we went out for fresh air at the beach and faced that very ocean that they had betrayed their trust and changed their lives. The kids kicked off their shoes beside broken chunks of rubble and played and laughed in the wind. I captured a photo of one beautiful young girl with a UNICEF canteen around her neck, releasing her matching scarf in the breeze by the sea. Leaving there, I headed up to the Trinco area in the northeast and stayed at a hotel on the coast where I could see locals hauling in fish nets in the morning. I spent a week working with refugee kids alongside the organization's national workers in that area, a driver, a translator, and another worker who took me to the communities. They did not know what to expect, and in other ways, neither did I. Our first stop was a small classroom. You see it here. And our second was a dusty village of makeshift shelters and community gathering spots. I would occasionally hand my camera off to someone so I could be in a few photos. At the first village, our driver, named Raghu, started taking pictures with his camera of me working with the kids. You'll see some of his with digital timestamps in the bottom corners. And on the way back, my translator, a beautiful Hindu woman named Shelvi, told me they had discussed stopping for ice cream along the way back to the hotel. They were struck by the connections the kids had in doing something fun, creative, colorful, and even healing in the midst of the dust and heat and hurt of the community. I was so honored by that ice cream. We were limited in conversation and yet rejuvenated and newly connected. We went around to the remaining villages, and in one, I met Raghu's family and discovered he was considered the village elder. In one of the final villages, there were so many kids, we divided them into younger and older kids. The younger ones first did oil pastel fish and sea creatures, and then watercolored over them, creating a beautiful resist and possibly making some peace with a force of uncertainty. Then an older group of kids drew two pictures. One, they're the younger kids there. The older kids group, first picture was one of the way life had been. And then their second was one of the future they imagined they want. They then shared their second drawings, and there were future teachers and doctors, flowers and fences. We circled around and we went deeper. I asked what they needed, and they said there were answers of like flip-flops, water, playground equipment. Then one said that others had come and nothing had changed yet. I could barely speak into their limitations, and I had very short moments to think as my translator communicated. She spoke far longer than I had about how they are the key. They make the difference. And I realized some things I had said had resonated with her, and she was elaborating with more enthusiasm than I had, that she was inspiring and empowering them without physical gifts, but with internal ones. She then asked me to lead them in a prayer, and she translated my now broken English words into something bigger than we were. On one of the last trips, the area director came with us that day to help distribute supplies, and as our route passed by landmine warning signs, I asked about them. You see them there. She laughed at my curiosity and joked, "Oh, Paige, we can stop and have a Coke at one of those." Cautionary signs of war with NGO signs claiming spots of aid were still new and unsettling to me, but were just part of daily life there. I won't get into this here, but there's a lot to be said about the visual culture of our surroundings, which we get accustomed to, and how they affect our notions of safety, space, ambition, and expectations. Near the end of my time working in the camps and villages, my friend joined us from the main office in Colombo to the fieldwork in the Northeast to interview locals and write stories about how their NGO was helping, and also to pick me up so I could catch my flight home soon. On our way out of the area, the day before I was scheduled to fly home and start teaching in Kentucky, our car was stopped by a burning stack of tires, a street barricade, and masked gunmen. Reminders we were still in an unstable and war-torn region. and the ceasefire agreement was fragile at best. Our driver got out to negotiate our cause against my friend's caution, and very fortunately, our car was eventually granted passage. I remember gazing out that window, wondering how would this unfold, whom I was leaving behind, and what I was trying to get back to. A few days later, I joined faculty meetings deciding on dress codes and whether students could wear flip-flops this year. In my art classroom with my students that fall, I occasionally shared some of my experiences from the other side of the world, but most of it was not quite ready to come out of my head. We made art, we critiqued, we discussed, reflected, presented, and we learned perspective on paper as well as in the way we view each other. I also learned that Raghu had been shot in crossfire and had died. In conclusion, Bono's address at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. in 2006 was published as a book along with his photography. It's called On the Move. You see a piece of it right there in the picture. At the beginning, he writes, "This book is dedicated to the little boy on page 17. He changed my life." I can't remember his name. He spoke the words I felt 1 year before, taking the picture of a little boy who shared his watercolor resist of the chaotic sea. He would not smile. And I took his picture with me years later to do my practice-based PhD on how art can cause a shift in us to see things differently, which leads us to action. He is the little boy on my page 130. It's difficult to integrate trauma into daily routines, fulfilling expectations and meeting demands and deadlines. Some of you have experienced your own seasons of loss and devastation, as have I. And certainly some of your students, colleagues, employees, family members, and friends have. What can art do to touch those places carefully and to shine a tolerable light in darkness? The content here may spark some ideas in you and your context. In my limited time remaining here, I'll outline just a few key points to generate trajectories as you navigate your life and work and influence others. There are 5 main ideas listed here to help know what to do, what you may already be doing, and why visual art is significant to working through trauma. More resources that go into depth of research are found in the supplemental file for this session. Number 1 out of 5, regulate. First, it's important to neutralize, normalize, regulate, make routines to give structure and stability so that functioning can happen and eventually healing can take place. Second, to recognize. It's important to pay attention and to notice what we are paying attention to posture ourselves in ways that are safe for others, value others, and communicate authentic care. Third, to relate. It's important to empathize, see how others see themselves and the world, hear their stories, and consider how our words might be received, and be a person of connection, whether as a relationship or as a resource to meeting needs, or maybe both relationship and resource. Number 4, reason. It's important to help us make sense of things, even if we cannot fully understand what happened and why. We can break thought cycles, gain clarity, realize and own what we are responsible for and what we are not responsible for, and what we can and can't control. 5, rebuild. It's important to facilitate the experience of art making, to foster creative methods and experimenting with materials, and for reflection and response, implementing both additive and subtractive methods. There's an analogy here. Taking some things out that do not need to be there and discovering and deciding what to enhance. To generate fresh ideas, deconstruct notions and narratives, and build new pathways and perspectives, both in outward expression and inward shifts. Remember what art is: making visible that which was invisible, the need to create, visual communication. It tells a story and records history. It's an expression of ideas. From these basics of what visual art is, there are powerful implications for working through trauma. Making what was absent into something present, may memorialize loss or realize the generative power that we have. The need to create reminds us that we can make things new. Visual communication crosses boundaries, collapses barriers, and makes ideas tangible and exchangeable. It can change narratives and archive experiences, and it can express what needs a breath of fresh air and put motion to what is stuck. What art education has the potential to do is immeasurably good for humans and relationships, cultures, and societies. My aim here today has been primarily through image and also through storytelling to demonstrate the potential for us to acknowledge trauma, loss, and devastation in ourselves and others, and through visual art and response to shift our focus towards seeing the future in a new perspective, which includes light, hope, and our participation in the work to get there. Thank you very much for being here.